Imagine there was a place where all the weirdest ideas in warfare were brought together. It might look something like this. Buried in these boxes would be every bizarre weapon you can think of, and some you would never believe. History's most bizarre weapons and plans. Despite their shocking and sometimes disturbing nature, every story we'll tell is entirely true. Nuclear landmines insulated by chickens. Bionic kittens as bugging devices. Bombs made of bats, cats, dogs, and pigeons. Exploding pancakes you can cook and eat. And an aircraft carrier made of ice. We're about to delve into the strangest recesses of military history. Every weapon you're about to see was actually considered for combat. But our experts are about to reveal the chosen few. The unique weapons that are so weird, they might just work. If you're gonna build weird, you might as well think big. And ideas don't come much bigger than our first weird weapon. Today's aircraft carriers are some of the biggest ships ever designed. More than 1,000 feet long, with armor 8 inches thick, and carrying 70 aircraft or more. But these are mere dwarfs compared to the brainchild of one British scientist. In 1942, he planned to build an aircraft carrier bigger than the Empire State Building, with impenetrable armor. And he would build it out of ice.
Ice, as in frozen water?
Wait a minute, they tried to use ice to build aircraft carriers. Now, who did this?
His name was Geoffrey Pike. British journalist, part-time spy, full-time inventor. And as weird as it sounds, the following story actually happened during World War II.
Pike was definitely eccentric.
You want to have some crazy people in your military blue sky research department.
Pike wanted to use ice for 2 very simple reasons. First, steel was in very, very short supply during World War II. And second, ice floats. Remember the Titanic? It sank. But what about the iceberg? The iceberg didn't sink because it couldn't. Water has a rare quality. When it freezes, it is even lighter than when it's a liquid. This means it is naturally buoyant.
There's certainly an almost deranged logic to it.
Ice might float, but as our high-tech test is about to show, ice is not ideally suited to your typical combat situation. Say it gets hit by a bomb. It shatters. No surprise there. Ice has a crystalline structure, which makes it very brittle. And brittle is bad when you're being shot at with high explosives. But Pike had thought of that. He had a secret ingredient that would solve the problem. A flexible substance which is a natural insulator, which can physically bolster ice's crystalline structure. A truly miraculous material called sawdust.
The idea really is to exploit the sort of properties of two different materials and combine them together.
Pound for pound, the new material was as strong as concrete. And as we can see, it's impervious to massive strikes. They called it pykrete. Lord Louis Mountbatten, the chief of combined operations, was seriously excited by this crazy idea. He hightailed it over to Winston Churchill's residence with a block of pykrete, but the Prime Minister was in the bath.
He walked into the bathroom and he dropped a hunk of this stuff into the bath with Winston Churchill.
A hot bath was ideal to demonstrate pykrete's final ace in the hole. Incredibly, after half an hour, the block still hadn't melted. This is because wood is one of the best natural insulators in the world.
The way the heat goes through it is broken down, because every time you come to a little piece of sawdust in it, it's like a little blanket, keeping the next bit cold for a long time.
Churchill thought this was great stuff, so he said, let's go with a project.
Churchill was so impressed that he and Mountbatten took the plan to a top-level meeting with the US military. Mountbatten had a sales pitch that would silence anyone who dared doubt the wisdom of a ship made of ice.
He fired a bullet into the pykrete.
A pistol bullet travels at over 400 miles an hour and can punch a hole through a steel helmet at 100 yards. But it can't break pykrete.
The bullet ricochets everywhere.
The ricochet grazed an admiral's pants and wound up in the wall. The pykrete survived. Pike's unsinkable ice ship got the green light. Then, as history reveals, everyone got a little carried away. The Admiralty wanted a torpedo-proof hull 40 feet thick. The Fleet Air Arm wanted a deck 2,000 feet long for their heavy bombers. And the Navy wanted a rudder 100 feet high. It would be twice as big as a modern aircraft carrier. But they forgot one thing. To build this monster, they would need enormous refrigeration plants to cool the pykrete to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. And what are refrigeration plants made out of? The same rare material that had prompted the research in the first place: steel.
It actually took more steel to build and refrigerate the thing than it did to actually make a ship of steel.
There simply wasn't enough spare steel available to make a ship whose chief virtue was that it wasn't made out of steel. The idea of an ice ship simply melted away.
Close but no cigar.
Genius, especially in weird warfare, knows no bounds. The kind of mind that comes up with a ship of ice is hardly going to let practicality get in the way. Throughout modern history, some of the craziest ideas have involved animals. And when it comes to using animals in weapons, weird warriors have really pushed the boundaries. Even so, with the onset of the Cold War, things got a little out of hand. It's the 1950s. Everyone in Europe fears a surprise attack from the Russian army. So one idea is to take landmines to a whole new level. It's an idea that will involve nuclear weapons and warm poultry. Enter Operation Blue Peacock.
The story behind the Blue Peacock project is kind of a story about a perfectly reasonable idea that goes quite right off the rails.
That is, if you consider using nuclear bombs as landmines a reasonable idea.
They would bury a series of 10-kiloton nuclear weapons along the border of East and West Germany.
These massive nuclear weapons would be triggered by an electronic timer. But there was one small problem.
It didn't work when it got cold.
Electronic conductors are sensitive to freezing temperatures, and it gets very cold on this border in winter. But great military minds don't give up that easily.
How do you keep them warm?
They first tried thermal blankets. Didn't work.
I suppose it could be some type of electronic heating device, or it could be a living, breathing animal that provides warmth and energy from its body.
Bingo!
They decided to surround them with chickens.
And it was chickens.
The thinking behind this was simple. Chickens are warm-blooded creatures. Really warm. The average body heat of a chicken is 107 degrees Fahrenheit. If you put 40 chickens in a box, they raise its temperature by 8 degrees. So chickens could be used as natural insulators.
That's just crazy. How do you keep the chickens alive? How do you keep the chickens from escaping? How do you keep the chickens from pecking away at the bomb and disabling it? What do you do with all the chicken manure that they're going to be spreading around?
Plans for the defense of the free world had clearly gotten carried away. Luckily, someone, somewhere, did a reality check. Taking massive tanks out with the help of warm poultry might sound stupid, but as we'll see, there is a long and ridiculous history of using animals in weird warfare. From pigeon-guided bombs to mosquitoes of mass destruction, weird warriors have tried every kind of trick to turn animals into weapons, including turning man's best friend into a canine tank buster. It is World War II, and the Nazis are running rampant across the Eastern Front. Tanks are still the problem. This time, it's the Russians who are trying to stop the Nazis in Hitler's panzer divisions. But everything they try gets blown away before it even comes close.
The German tanks were phenomenal. They were very capable, and they were wreaking havoc. And you've got this problem. How do you knock out a tank? And they didn't have all the munitions you may have now as anti-tank munitions. How do you take this weapon out of the battlefield?
The best way to bomb a tank is from underneath. And to do this, the Russians needed a guidance system with speed, agility, and intelligence. Meet Shadow. Shadow is going to help us demonstrate how the Russians trained their dogs. Their trainers use a technique called positive reinforcement, made famous by the experiments of Ivan Pavlov and his dogs in 1927. After completing a task, Shadow was given a reward, which makes him want to do it again. The Russians trained the dog to complete a series of tasks. Run under an enemy tank, drop a bomb, run back.
It's called chaining. He has to look at the tank. He has to follow the command. He has to run. He has to run quickly. He has to dive under the tank. You would train these operations, sequentially or by themselves, and then chain them together where the reinforcer is given at the end.
It's the next bit that gets really dangerous.
Right. Need to pop this on him.
Yeah.
In what today would be seen as animal cruelty, the dog carries a 26-pound mine in a jacket strapped on its back. For this to work, the Russians had to train a dog like Shadow to pull the doggy chew and release the bomb.
It's called shaping. When he looks at the string, you give him a reinforcement. You keep doing that. And then he eventually will touch his mouth to the string. And then eventually he'll pull it.
It was an ambitious plan. Shadow would have to release the bomb at exactly the right place and exactly the right time.
How confident would you be that you could train a dog and be sure it was always going to pull it at the right place?
I wouldn't. No.
This is where the whole thing broke down for the Russians. When they actually applied the plan, the dogs would run under the tank, then run back to their trainers, usually with the ticking bomb still attached to the harness. So it was back to the drawing board with one simple fix.
So what we have now is a trigger mechanism. When he goes under, this comes down, it detonates.
In training, it works perfectly. The problem is that the Russians just didn't think or smell like dogs.
A good way to put it is the dog sees the world through his nose.
The Russians made the mistake of training the dogs on their own tanks. And as it turns out, Russian tanks have their own unique smell.
And the Russian tanks used diesel. When it came to deploying the bombs on the German tanks, they were gasoline. Of course, that's confusing.
From the dog's point of view, anything that smelled of gasoline clearly wasn't a tank. So the dog got confused. Having failed to find anything that smelled like a tank, the dog came back with his bomb and its automatic trigger. Even so, the dog bomb worked, sort of. At the Battle of Kursk in August 1943, dog bombs took out 12 German panzers, which left the Germans with only 2,488 in that battle alone. The Russians never recorded how many tanks they lost to friendly fire. Once bitten, twice shy. During the 1950s, weird warfare experts shrank their ambitions in the quest for the perfect weapons delivery system. It's small, it's deadly, it's an insect. Aedes aegypti is a deadly mosquito that carries yellow fever. Along with its malaria-carrying cousin, it has killed more people than all man-made weapons in history, which made the Americans wonder, could the Russians turn mosquitoes into a flying army of miniature syringes?
Nasty little insects, and certainly, weaponizing them could be something that would be useful to the military.
It's kind of biological warfare before biological warfare.
A third of all people bitten by the mosquito will die. That, in itself, is pretty compelling evidence.
You're going to drop giant collections of yellow fever mosquitoes on the enemy and hope that an outbreak of yellow fever will knock them dead.
But could the Russians really turn a mosquito into a weapon of mass destruction? The only way to find out was a live fire test. But the US military wanted to keep this research a secret, so they tested it in their own backyard.
One of the things that stands out for me about Operation Big Buzz is that the US tested it on Americans.
It is a fine spring day in May 1955. And the good citizens of Georgia are unaware that they are about to take part in one of the most fiendish mass experiments in the history of warfare. As the bombers drone overhead, nobody suspects that they are dispersing 330,000 mosquitoes across the state.
They weren't infected with yellow fever, so there was no real risk of an outbreak of disease, and the goal was to see how far the mosquitoes would spread.
The 330,000 bloodthirsty insects spread across an area of about half a square mile, attacking hundreds of hapless locals. Big Buzz proved that a biological attack using mosquitoes was possible. But to date, it has only ever been used by the U.S. military against its own people.
See, I've lived in Georgia. Is that why the hell there's so many mosquitoes there today? You know, I'm kind of pissed about that.
The problem with chicken mines, anti-tank dogs, and ships made of ice is that they're just too weird to work. But sometimes, just sometimes, the simplest of ideas can yield success. The following story is 100% true. It involves an unlikely hero emerging from the direst of circumstances. How do you call for help if you're surrounded and trapped in enemy territory? This was the question for the US 77th, the Lost Battalion, trapped in a French forest during World War I. They are surrounded by the Germans, but no one knows that they're in trouble. With casualties mounting, they desperately need to get a message back to headquarters.
Communication is probably one of the most, if not the most important thing that you have to have on the battlefield.
During the First World War, communication on the battlefield was a very, very hard thing to do. Under normal circumstances, what they did was they strung wire communication, telephone wire.
But these are not normal circumstances. Their only hope for survival lies in the hands of a high-precision airborne delivery system. The Pigeon. Pigeons are born with an innate internal compass that lets them navigate the Earth's magnetic field.
This is done through special cells that contain tiny little magnets, and in the case of birds, these are either located in the brain or in part of the beak.
In World War I, pigeons were often used as couriers to send long-distance messages.
And of course, the Germans knew that these pigeons carried messages, and they became targets.
One by one, the winged warriors of the 77th get picked off by the Germans. Finally, just one is left, named Cher Ami, French for dear friend. He sets off across the killing ground, gets shot in the breast, blinded in one eye. His leg hangs on by just the tendon, but he does not stop. Finally, Cher Ami staggers into U.S. Army headquarters. His message saves the Lost Battalion from destruction. Cher Ami is fitted with a wooden leg and declared a great American hero. He is sent stateside by U.S. General John J. Pershing, having saved the lives of 194 men.
There's something called the Dickens Medal, which is awarded to animals for bravery, and the animals that have been awarded the most Dickens Medal are pigeons.
With the advent of modern warfare, the battlefield was dominated by two key weapons: the tank and the airplane. For weird warriors, the next step seemed obvious.
The idea of a flying tank, you can almost see it. Aircraft are new, tanks are new, you breed the two together and you've got the ultimate weapon. Duh.
Of course, there's one fundamental problem. Tanks are heavy. Really heavy. They're also built like a brick. Planes, on the other hand, are designed to create lift.
Tanks are on the ground, aircraft are in the air. That's the way it should be.
But trivial details like this don't deter megalomaniac dictators. Enter Joseph Stalin. He knew that Hitler's powerful panzer divisions had overrun Europe and would soon overrun the Soviet Union. Stalin needs a superweapon, and fast. It's time to forget the laws of gravity. It's time to make a flying tank. Russia's aviation engineers go to work. The solution they come up with is ingenious. Take a tank, fit it with wings made of wood and fabric, and attach a long twin tail. Tow it into the air and let it glide its way to victory. It was called the A-40 Krylia Tanka, which is Russian for tank wing. In 1942, a prototype was built. Incredibly, as this photograph shows, it actually made it into the air. Genius! Well, not so much. Obviously, there was no getting away from the basic problem. So there had to be a few minor modifications to the intimidating tank.
Got rid of a lot of the firepower, got rid of a lot of the armor.
Which was a bit of a problem.
Actually, if you get rid of firepower, you get rid of armor, it's not a tank anymore.
If somebody tried to put me in a tank that had no armor on it and said that we were going to glide it onto the battlefield, I'd be like, are you out of your mind?
Just weeks after its maiden flight, someone in the Russian military spotted its fatal flaws. The A-40 Krylia Tanka was cancelled. So much for the flying tank.
I suppose life's very simple. You can have the flying, you can have the tank, you can't have both.
If you couldn't fly a tank and still rule the air, maybe you should try something else. By the late 1950s, jetpacks were all the rage, and it was every egghead's dream to emulate science fiction and get a man afloat. In 1956, the U.S. Navy achieved this with the Hiller VZ-1 Pawnee Aerocycle.
An airborne platform seemed a perfect way to get a scout to cover a lot of ground where they could see a lot of things.
The VZ-1 was essentially a mini helicopter with a man standing on the blades. The two massive blades span in opposite directions beneath the pilot's feet, creating lift, and it was steered by the pilot simply shifting his weight, a technique known as kinesthetic control. It's the same principle as riding a surfboard in midair. But even good riders tend to fall off surfboards.
If you fell off the platform, you were going to get chopped up by these counter-rotating propellers.
But that wasn't the real danger. The Army engineers were so excited about getting airborne, they forgot one of the fundamental rules of ground-based warfare.
When I was an infantry instructor, I said it 1,000 times too. You never want to walk like on top of a ridge. Now you're skylined and everybody and their brother's shooting at you.
They're popping up here. Shoot me. No, shoot me.
Faced with the prospect of becoming an airborne version of whack-a-mole, the Navy quietly abandoned the hover platform. Weird warriors may not have conquered the air, but ever since man first fired a bow and arrow, they've dreamed of a missile that would know where it was going, get past any obstacle, and outwit any defense. But before the ICBM, before lasers and satellites and computers, man's ingenuity would use other things, like pigeons and cats, and even creating a solution out of thin air. Back in World War II, the Japanese had an audacious plan to bomb America. Not Pearl Harbor, mainland America. But their bombers weren't capable of flying across the Pacific. So they came up with a crazy plan. Balloons. The idea was simple. Put a balloon in the air, stick a bomb on it, float it across the Pacific, and hope it hits America. But how do you float it in the right direction?
There's no GPS, because there's no satellites in space. There's no laser-guided weapons, because the laser hasn't been invented yet. So what do?
That didn't bother the Japanese, because they had an ace up their sleeve. They would use the power of nature, the jet stream.
No one suspected the existence of the jet stream, apart from the Japanese at the time.
The jet stream is a current of air 30,000 feet up, circling the globe at up to 250 miles an hour. It flows west to east, from Japan directly to America.
The jet stream over Japan is very, very, very strong.
Which is why flights from Tokyo to LA with the jet stream take under 10 hours, while the trip back against the jet stream takes over 11 hours. The Japanese were certain that the jet stream would carry their balloons all the way to the United States. Only problem is, the jet stream over the Pacific is less than 3 miles thick. And balloons aren't particularly prone to level flight. This is because the gases inside contract in the cold and expand in warm air, pushing the balloon out of the jet stream.
You have to find a way of keeping your balloon in the fast wind to get it across all the way to America.
But, as this US Air Force film shows, the Japanese had thought of everything.
There's quite a lot of cunning technology which went into this.
At night, as the balloon cools down and contracts, it sinks out of the jet stream. So the Japanese rig it to fire off ballast to maintain the correct altitude. In the daytime, the balloon warms up and rises again. So it vents the expanded hydrogen to stop the ascent. It worked. Though the bombs took 3 days to cross the Pacific, the Japanese had invented an ICBM, the Intercontinental Balloon Missile.
By the standards of the day, this was a fantastic feat.
The Japanese had come up with a bomb delivery system that could cross the Pacific, and actually launched it at North America. That sounds really impressive until you realize one simple thing. Between November 1944 and April 1945, Japan targeted over 9,000 balloon bombs at the USA, but only 300 are known to have fallen on American soil.
You've got to be completely honest. This is not a guided weapon. You're hoping that nature takes it the right direction.
As a terror weapon, it worked. The balloons did hit America. As this rare footage shows, they fell from Alaska to Texas, to California and Detroit. But not a single balloon hit a major strategic target.
One cannot think of a more random weapon.
If you want to hit a target at more than 30 paces, you need a guidance system. And in the days before computers, that meant you had to get inventive. During World War II, some scientists in the US Navy were really inventive. They thought they had the perfect device.
The cat-guided bomb was an idea that, again, this is one of these things that sound ludicrous.
But the thinking behind it was simple.
Cats hate water. So the Navy said, well, gee whiz, we can put this to use.
This is what the renegade researchers came up with. The cat is strapped in a harness inside the bomb, which is then dropped from high altitude over the enemy ship.
Because the cat doesn't want to get wet, it will try to guide the bomb onto the ship.
As the cat twists and turns, the harness is designed so that the cat moves the tail fins to steer the bomb directly at the Japanese ships. Unsurprisingly, the idea didn't work for two simple reasons. First, cats aren't afraid of water. And even more importantly,
the bomb generated so much G-force on the cat that the cat was rendered unconscious, so your guidance system was wiped out immediately.
The cat-guided bomb sank without a trace.
If somebody came up to me and said, listen, we're going to use cats to guide missiles, to drop it on a ship because cats don't like water, I'd probably punch you right in the face and say you're an idiot.
It was becoming clear that cats were not ideal as bomb guidance systems. By 1943, the US Navy was desperate for some device that could bomb mainland Japan. Their solution was the brainchild of Dr. Lytle S. Adams. Part-time fiendish inventor, full-time dentist. He plans to bomb Japan using bats. In 1941, Dr. Lytle Adams was visiting the Batcave of Carlsbad Caverns when he heard the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. The two events fused in his mind, and he came up with a cunning plan.
A bat bomb? Are you out of your mind?
But Adams isn't totally nuts. He's done the math.
There are two ways to get 15 kilotons on a target. One, you can drop one atomic bomb, 15 kilotons, no problem. The other way to do it is you use 1 million bats with a half an ounce of incendiary on them, or high explosive, same effect, 15 kilotons.
Adams had thought everything through. Bats have an inbuilt guidance system, acoustic sensors. They carry their young in flight, so they're strong enough to carry explosives. They like to roost under building roofs. And Japanese buildings were mostly made of wood, bamboo, and paper, perfect for setting fire to. It all makes perfect sense.
You get a big fire going with 1 million bats, you're going to incinerate the city.
It's a weird combination of logic and insanity. The idea might have died, except one of his patients was married to a very powerful man.
Franklin D. Roosevelt said that this man is not a nut.
I don't find it amazing that the president decided to go ahead with this. I think that they needed to try anything. And if the science showed that it could work and the tests showed that it worked, what do you got to lose?
A $2 million research and development program gets underway. To make the tiny bat bombs, Adams uses a secret new invention, a jelly explosive called napalm. The Air Force will drop hundreds of containers, letting loose 1,000 bats at a time. Each bat would carry a half-ounce napalm charge clipped to its chest, rigged with a timer. Once the napalm detonated, it would burn very fiercely and turn to liquid. The flames would pour into every crack and crevice. He was going to turn Tokyo into a firestorm.
The bat bomb worked. It absolutely worked. There was no question about that it worked.
In August 1943, the bat bombs unleashed the firestorm of Adams' dreams. Unfortunately, this isn't Tokyo. It's a U.S. military base in Carlsbad, New Mexico, where the bats are being trained.
The bats were accidentally released and they immediately went to the base where they were working from and decided to, roost and destroy the entire base.
Thanks to the bats, the American air base burned to the ground. When it comes to guided weapons, whether balloons or bats, weird sometimes works. And as we'll see, an animal guidance system could work really well if the animal could be trained to go in the right direction and it didn't black out in midair. The answer was simple: the pigeon.
If somebody says to you, pigeon-guided missile, the first thing you say is, what? It doesn't make any sense. Pigeons come home. Wrong place for a missile.
But genius sees things differently. At the height of World War II, the Allies needed a guidance system that could target enemy warships. They found the answer in Harvard, and it was truly weird. Meet B.F. Skinner, Harvard professor and world authority on human and animal behavior.
B.F. Skinner was one of the great minds in psychology.
He actually pioneered positive and negative reinforcement, the basis of all animal training.
Skinner was probably the greatest psychologist of the 20th century. Some people think Sigmund Freud was, but he was really a neurologist.
After years of studying animals in the lab, Skinner discovered a priceless military secret. If a smart weapon needs a smart pilot, then pigeons are the top guns. They have exceptional eyesight. Their brains can process visual information 3 times faster than a human's. And Most importantly, they can be trained.
They're very smart. If someone tries to insult you and say you're a bird brain, my response would probably be, thank you.
Skinner trains his pigeons using positive reinforcement. If it makes the right response, like pecking when it's told to, the pigeon gets a reward. Using this method, he trains them to complete incredibly complex tasks. He even teaches them to play ping pong. Project Pigeon gets full military funding. And Skinner comes up with a groundbreaking missile design. The pigeon's head is squeezed into a sock and is placed in the missile where it can see the target ship through the windows. When the missile goes off course, the pigeon pecks at the target ship. The pecking controls the tail fins, bringing the missile back on target.
He's not thinking, I want to get that target, all right? But he is going to keep pecking when the target stays on the center, because that's when he was getting his food during training.
A metal conductor was attached to the bird's beak to transmit its pecks to the guidance system. This footage shows Skinner's actual testing using projected images of enemy ships. The pigeons hit the target with near-perfect accuracy.
B.F. Skinner proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a pigeon-guided bomb would work.
Even though it tested well, the U.S. High Command simply could not bring themselves to trust their bombs to bird brains. Luckily for the pigeons, they pulled the plug. The super psychologist was ultimately stymied by a simple lack of trust.
But wouldn't you love to see it? Imagine taking out the enemy with a pigeon. That's gotta be worth seeing.
Weird warriors will tell you that honesty is everything, but they're lying.
Deception works in war. In fact, it's very, very important.
In weird warfare, you've got to fight sneaky.
Winston Churchill said it was so important that the truth had to be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies.
Things are never what they seem. Especially when dummies go to war. Dummies have a long and dishonorable history in weird warfare, going back almost 1,300 years. A fortress of the Chinese Tang Dynasty is under siege, and the defenders have run out of arrows. So their general comes up with a cunning plan.
He's gonna make straw dummies and then lower them down the side of the castle at night.
The dummies are bait, arrow bait.
The enemy will think that this is an attack and will pepper them with arrows.
The dummies are pulled back over the castle walls. And hey presto, instant resupply of arrows.
The Tang people were rearmed. It's an absolutely brilliant scheme. Absolutely brilliant.
Using dummies to rearm your troops was unquestionably clever. But during World War I, they went one step further. They directly saved thousands of lives. During trench warfare, the British Army lost countless men to an invisible enemy. Highly trained German snipers.
A sniper can be a very long way away, and all of a sudden, somebody's dead.
Eliminating snipers became priority number one. But how do you kill someone whose main job is to hide? Our weird warfare specialists are about to demonstrate. Our enemy sniper is going to hide behind one of these 5 trees. Using a dummy, the home side has got to find and eliminate him.
The dummies that were used during the First World War for anti-sniping purposes in particular weren't very realistic, but they could be shot at. And that was the point, to get the enemy to shoot them.
Details are added to make the dummy look more lifelike.
To make the thing more realistic, you give the dummy all sorts of characteristics which make it more human.
The dummy's features don't matter. All you need is something that feels real.
You do a thing in psychology called closure. You complete the picture.
The sniper sees a helmet, a cigarette, and a human-like movement. So his brain tells him that this is a human target. Because bullets travel in a straight line, the exit and entry wounds make a line of sight that points directly to the sniper's location.
Yeah, hold on, it's a 2. 2? He's at 2. Excellent.
Dummies appeared in numerous battles during World War I, including the Somme, and by some estimates saved more than 3,500 lives. So the psychological principle of closure was being used to fool snipers as early as World War I. But by the 1980s, scientists and spies had an even better understanding of how it could work. And one agent would use closure to help him vanish into thin air. New Mexico, 1985. Ex-CIA agent Edward Lee Howard is suspected of passing vital secrets to the Soviet Union.
The U.S. were highly suspicious of him, and they actually had him under observation.
Howard is in big trouble. The net is closing in, and he's running out of options.
Howard decides he's got to escape, and he recruits his wife to help him get away.
No CIA agent has successfully defected to the Soviet Union, but that doesn't deter the Howards.
The Howards were very smart. They were experienced spy people. They knew how surveillance worked, and they knew that to deceive someone, they had to set up a picture like a play. They had to set up an act.
Using the art of dummy warfare, Edward Lee Howard plans to give his watchers the slip. This modern experiment will demonstrate how. Jake Fairney is a neuroscientist. He looks as if he's lost, but it's all an act. His colleagues are waiting in the wings.
Even designing the experiment and taking part in it, you just don't think it's actually going to work.
What Jake really wants to know is how much attention people pay to what's going on around them. As his subject looks at the map, Jake's colleague switches with him.
I've got to switch, sorry.
But the subject doesn't notice.
Ball came through, we switched.
Oh, what? That's really embarrassing.
People think that their eyes are like video cameras and take in every fine detail, but actually it's shocking how little people actually take in.
This is the phenomenon of change blindness in action. When we are focused on one area, like a map, we miss other visual cues. The key is to create a blind spot, so the switch happens out of sight. People assume they're still talking to the same person. Hardly anyone questions the details.
Under certain situations, 90% of people don't notice a change at all.
You don't even need a living, breathing person. Our old friend, the dummy, can stand in.
Sorry, I just need to get this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is it, do you know where we are on here? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Even when you've done the experiment over and over, just can't believe every time that it works.
Back in New Mexico, change blindness will allow Edward Lee Howard to disappear. While driving with his wife, Howard plans to bail out of the car and be replaced by a dummy.
You could, say, make a turn at a corner, bail out of the car, your buddy could pop the dummy, and the dummy would appear, and the pursuit would continue.
But they have to be quick. They only have 5 seconds to get the dummy into position. So how do you come up with a compact and fast-acting dummy? As Howard was aware, the CIA had a solution, and it was truly bizarre. In the early 1980s, the CIA investigated how to use dummies with change blindness. What they needed was something that would look like a human and could be erected in seconds.
I would think it'd be something that could deploy just like an airbag, real quick.
I start thinking of those dolls that are sometimes used for other purposes.
But getting sex dolls delivered to Langley might raise some eyebrows.
Somebody's got to go down to a shop. Said, excuse me, I'd like half a dozen blow-up dolls, please. But don't worry, we're with the CIA. It's all perfectly legitimate. Yeah, whatever.
Our weird warfare scientists are about to test the very problem the CIA was trying to solve.
Your problem's going to be how are you going to make it fast enough that it will inflate quickly, but at the same time be able to stop at the crucial moment before this thing explodes.
The first option, pumping up the doll with compressed air.
Okay, ready to go? Okay.
But will they get it up fast enough?
Now, here we go.
"10 seconds, much too slow, and the doll's still hanging a bit loose."
A second option is, of course, to use some kind of compressed gas, and certainly the one that's most easily to hand is carbon dioxide, which you have in fire extinguishers.
The extinguisher option. Much higher pressure, much faster, much riskier. For the doll, anyway.
Come round the corner, braking now.
Oh, wow!
Oh dear.
You get extremely rapid cooling. In other words, you immediately get frosting up around the place where you fire the extinguisher.
Frost and thin plastic don't mix. The fact is, sex dolls were never built for speed. Howard and his wife Mary are aware of these CIA tests. History reveals they had a much simpler technique. Mary is driving. She approaches a corner and makes a quick turn. Howard rolls out of the passenger car door and hides. Mary pulls out the simplest dummy. Just a toilet plunger, a coat hanger, and a jacket, with a styrofoam head and a wig, and attaches it to the roof of the car. As the FBI surveillance team come round the corner seconds later, they don't notice a thing.
The observers didn't figure out what was going on until Howard had literally stepped off a plane in Moscow and announced, essentially, that he had defected.
And Howard achieved this with just a dummy and a coat hanger.
Round the corner, brake!
Out!
Out. Job done. That's it, and we're on our way again.
As quick as that?
Yep.
dummies might help deceive the enemy, but in contemporary warfare, big weapons, big planes, and big vehicles rule the battlefield. But almost 100 years ago, in World War I, opposing sides dug in deep and battled from the trenches. It was a slow process. Then, in 1915, something new emerged that would change warfare forever. That something was the tank.
Tanks in general are awesome because here you have this moving fortress of steel coming across the battlefield carrying all this firepower.
Most tanks of the time weighed less than 30 tons to stay agile. But one leader thought bigger was better. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia saw these awesome tanks and wanted one. But he figured that if a 30-ton tank was good, then a super tank would be even better.
Old boys like toys, and big boys like big toys.
The Russian tank would be the biggest and baddest tank ever constructed. Appropriately enough, its name was the Tsar tank, and its design would be revolutionary. Most tanks have tracks to cross battlefield terrain, but tracks slow you down. The top speed of the British Mark I tank at the time was just 4 miles an hour. A man could walk faster. The Russians not only wanted it to be big, it also had to be fast. Really fast. So they had a brilliant idea. But there was a problem. Wheels can get stuck in the rough terrain of a battlefield. To overcome this, the engineers had an idea. Think big. As these simple demonstrations show, small wheels have real problems when confronted by rough terrain. But big wheels don't.
The Tsar tank is just a crazy sort of, almost a mutant tricycle in a lot of ways.
And the Russians didn't hold back. They made the front wheels 30 feet in diameter, 5 times taller than a man. There was not one, but 3 gun turrets, mounted on the top and the sides. 2 massive engines provided 500 horsepower. It would crush everything in its path. In August 1915, the Tsar tank was ready for its first trials. In a secret forest location outside Moscow, a demonstration began in front of an audience of top Russian generals. The monster tank was unstoppable.
In the testing process, they drove this into a forest and it crushed the forest.
But then something happened. The tank hit a patch of soft, muddy ground and immediately bogged down. How could this have happened? Surely this is what the gigantic wheels were designed for. But there was a basic law of physics they'd forgotten. The tank was so huge that it weighed 40 tons, more than a fully loaded semi-trailer. It was too much for the mutant tricycle. Once it got stuck, it never moved again.
It remained in place for years until someone came along and literally cut it up for scrap.
Big wheels might not work, but in the mind of a homicidal lunatic, big guns were bound to be a winner. So it should come as no surprise that in World War II, Adolf Hitler set out to build the biggest gun in history. World War II saw warfare get even bigger and weirder, thanks to the Nazis. In 1943, they began constructing a colossal bunker near the coast of France, not too far from Britain. The mammoth structure was 73 feet high and 38 feet deep, with walls up to 16 feet thick, made entirely out of concrete. If it worked, it would launch 36 V-2 rockets every single day. It came to be known as Le Blockhouse. The Allies immediately mobilized massive bombing raids against Le Blockhouse. But the bunker was specifically designed to resist conventional bombs that exploded above ground.
Explosions which happen above ground produce an air blast.
To demonstrate the air blast, our explosives expert is setting a charge which replicates what happens when you drop a bomb on top of a bunker. It's called a shock wave and results in an extremely rapid rise in temperature and pressure. All that energy is absorbed by the bunker's walls, which are thick enough to withstand the blast. Despite the power of the explosion, the effect is minimal. The question for the Allies was how to destroy a massive bunker, specially designed to repel attacks from above. They needed someone who could think weird. They found him. His name was Barnes Wallis.
Barnes Wallis was an absolute unique thinker. He was an aircraft designer, but he also designed the bouncing bomb.
A bomb that bounces on water. Now that's our kind of engineer. Barnes Wallis realized that he could achieve the same effect if he somehow managed to bury his bomb under Le Blockhouse.
Rather than let the bomb explode above ground, what you do is you let it go underground.
Earth is much denser than air, so it transmits a much more powerful punch directly to the foundations of the building. A mini earthquake.
By providing that shake, you may be able to bring the whole building down on itself in one go.
But the Allies couldn't exactly sneak into occupied France and start digging an enormous hole under one of the most fortified buildings in the world. So Barnes Wallis came up with a brilliantly offbeat idea. An absolutely massive self-tunneling mine. Tallboy was the world's weirdest bomb. Its tip was made of heavily armored steel. It was put into a specially modified bomber designed to carry its weight and dropped from 4 miles high. That gave the bomb time to accelerate to more than 2,500 miles per hour, more than 3 times the speed of sound. Its hardened nose would tunnel deep into the ground. Then it would explode, creating a miniature earthquake that would bring the blockhouse crashing down. Barnes-Wallis had created a bomb that you could drop from below. Now, it was time to put it into practice. June 19th, 1944. A heavily modified Lancaster bomber from RAF 617 Squadron flies over the channel with Tallboy on board. Destination, Le Blockhouse. The Germans don't suspect a thing. The bomb enters the ground, and as Wallace predicted, sets off a mini earthquake. The mission is a success. Le Blockhouse is damaged beyond repair, and the V-2 rockets are put out of commission for good. Today, earthquake bombs are called bunker busters, and they're still in use by the U.S. Air Force. The V-2 rocket launcher wasn't the only plan the Nazis had for attacking the UK. It is 1943. The industrial heartland of Nazi Germany is being pounded by Allied bombers. Hitler's Air Force, the Luftwaffe, have not been able to effectively counter the attacks. It's not looking good for Germany. Hitler now wants a wonder weapon that can reach across the channel. A super cannon that can fire shells at London from occupied France. 100 miles away.
Hitler was a megalomaniac. He was really quite a bit mad.
In Hitler's case, that was married with a really almost pathological belief that he knew better than his own generals, that he knew better than his own scientists.
To keep him happy, Nazi engineers came up with something really monstrous. The barrel alone would be 490 feet long, twice as long as a jumbo jet. To maximize range, it needed an angle of 45 degrees. So, to support its weight, it had to be dug into the ground. To power the shell all the way to London, over 100 miles away, they fitted rocket boosters along the barrel. As the shell went past each booster, the explosive push increased its speed. The shells would leave the barrel at more than 3,300 miles per hour, twice as fast as a jet fighter. They would hit London within 2 minutes. And unlike a bomb or a missile, you wouldn't hear it coming. They called it the V-3 Supergun. By March 1944, it was almost ready to wipe out Britain. But a gun this big is really tricky to hide.
Everybody notices. The French resistance notices, the locals notice, and they notify the British and Americans, who immediately start going after it.
They waited till it was almost built, and then they used a 12,000-pound bomb to take it out.
Those bombs were more of Barnes-Wallis's tall boys. Hitler's supergun was a super-sitting duck. In the 20th century, the most vital fields of conflict disappeared from sight and hid in the shadows. This is the story of war fought with hidden microphones, noxious chemicals, exploding food, and dastardly gadgets. (1942). Mainland Europe is in the grips of a man who looks suspiciously like Charlie Chaplin's evil twin. Allied forces are scrambling to come up with a plan to defeat him. Across the Atlantic in Washington, the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, known as the OSS, have been studying Hitler, looking for a way to take him down. Based on his behavior, they believe he exhibits what they consider to be female tendencies, like poor emotional control and violent, passionate outbursts. They plan to use this to their advantage.
That's nothing more than crazy. It suggests more, I think, about the psychology of the American agents who came up with it and sort of an obsession with masculinity than it does an actual effective weapon of war.
That wasn't going to stop the male chauvinists in the OSS. Their plan was simple, but more than a little weird. Based on their findings, they thought it would be easy to turn Hitler into a girl.
They were going to expose him to a cocktail of estrogen and other things in the hopes that he would lose that iconic mustache.
Back then, in the mind of the OSS, female hormones equaled a squeaky voice and no facial hair. A direct attack on the most evil mustache in history. The plan had one fatal flaw. Giving a man estrogen will not make his facial hair fall out or his voice go squeaky. But they went ahead with it anyway. They paid Hitler's gardener to spray his food with estrogen. But they never got to find out that the plan was flawed, because the gardener simply ditched the estrogen and pocketed the cash. After all, it's not like the OSS could turn up on his doorstep and demand their money back, could they? The Office of Strategic Services may have cut its teeth fighting Nazis, but it was in the Far East that it came up with its most explosive idea. November 1942. OSS secret agents in Japanese-occupied China are working with the natives to sabotage Japanese supply lines. But that means high explosives, and they are hard to hide.
You're a spy or you're undercover, you're a saboteur. You have to have explosives. You can't just go with a big rucksack with sort of bomb written on it.
The OSS has a simple plan. Disguise the explosives as something completely innocent. They mix 80% high explosive with 20% Pillsbury Best flour.
It looks exactly like flour. That's very, very clever.
The OSS named it after America's most famous pancake mix, Aunt Jemima. And they're certain it will get past the guards at any checkpoint.
I think it's ingenious. I'd see a bag of flour. I wouldn't, think that that was explosive material.
But what if the guards decide to confiscate a bag of exploding flour and make a pancake out of it? Our weird warfare explosives expert is about to cook a pancake using the original OSS formula. Take 3 cups of military-grade Aunt Jemima, a little baking powder, milk, 1 egg, and melted lard. Now start grilling and stand well back. The secret lay in the high explosive they used, called HMX. HMX not only looks like flour, it's also highly resistant to heat. During testing, the OSS let one of their special pancakes burn to a crisp, but it never exploded. Not only could you cook the pancakes,
you could eat them safely, taste a little strange, but you wouldn't get poisoned.
And even after whisking and baking, it could still fulfill its real purpose. Our explosives expert is going to demonstrate using the pancake he just made. Even though he's cooked it to a crisp, he can still attach the pancake to a makeshift telegraph pole using more of the dough and some tape. Insert 2 military-issue blasting caps into a lump of plasticine, and presto! Genius.
It was smuggled into China, and Chinese guerrillas used it against a bridge across the Yangtze River, and it worked.
Aunt Jemima was beautifully simple, but the same can't be said for the next harebrained idea thought up by the successors to the OSS, the CIA. It is the 1950s. The Cold War between the US and Russia is at its height. CIA observers noticed that diplomats from the Soviet embassy would go outside for private conversations. If they could eavesdrop on these meetings, they might gather important information.
A bunch of geniuses at the CIA figured maybe we can wire up a cat to do our surveillance for us.
Two enemy agents sitting there talking, and here walks up a cat. They don't think anything of it. I don't doubt they tried to do that at all.
In 1961, the CIA launched Operation Acoustic Kitty, the most ludicrously complicated method of getting a microphone near a park bench ever thought up by man. CIA vets implanted a microphone into the ear canal of a cat. They put a transmitter into the cat's neck, where there's a natural loose pocket of skin. Then they ran a wire along the cat's spine to the tail to make an antenna, powered by the smallest battery they could find. The finished article? A bionic, acoustically equipped Super Kitty. But no matter what you call it, a cat is still a cat. This was clearly a plan thought up by a dog owner. Dogs you can train. Cats, not so much.
I've trained dogs before, but cats, they do whatever the hell they want. You know, so I've never trained a cat. I imagine that'd be pretty difficult.
But inconvenient biological facts were not going to deter the CIA. Acoustic Kitty was sent on its first field mission near the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. Nearby was a high-tech surveillance van filled with state-of-the-art audio receivers. Everything was set to record real high-grade intelligence as the cat approached the bench. When suddenly, Operation Acoustic Kitty died under the wheels of a Washington cab. It takes a special kind of mind to come up with weird weaponry, the kind of mind that is unfazed by reality, ridicule, or abject failure. For every weird weapon that works, 10 fall flat on their face. But despite these odds, weird warfare scientists remain undaunted. Whether it be pigeon-guided missiles, exploding food, or ships made of ice, Weird warfare has a long and ridiculous history of taking the utterly bizarre and turning it into something that might just work.